Greetings and welcome to the Progressive Christians podcast. We are the love your neighbor kind of Christians and not the storm of the Capitol kind. So if you're curious about what a socially and politically progressive Christianity looks like, then this is the podcast for you. My name is Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter and I'm your host. I am a professor of theology at Methodist Theological School in Ohio and the lead pastor of the Loft Faith community at Westwood United Methodist Church. If you like the show, please rate, review, all that good stuff. We especially are encouraging people to subscribe to our YouTube, as we are definitely on a new platform there, trying to get our numbers up. Everybody's doing great on iTunes and Spotify, but definitely keep the ratings up, like leaving comments and things of that nature. We just absolutely love it. And I'm joined by the full crew. Everybody is here today. Reverend Blair, Julia, and Wesley. How are y'all doing?
Hi. It's almost summer.
It is almost summer. It's cloudy today.
Kids are out of school next week in LA.
I know. I know. Actually, my friend Seth, who's in Omaha, his kids, they got out right before Memorial Day. Is that what it was last week?
Yeah.
Yeah. They got out. So they have like the regular like farming calendar.
In the Midwest, yeah.
That actually makes sense. LAUSD goes so long.
They do go.
It does. But they have like the weird structured days. So it's like you go out.
And they have more days off, I feel. I feel like kids in LA are like never in school.
Because they got like jobs.
Early release.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kids out here acting. They're trying to like, get them.
They have careers. Everyone contributes.
I mean, careers, yes. Successful ones, no.
We want to start out by actually just thanking a few people who have left some comments on our YouTube and Spotify.
Yes. So shout outs to our listeners and commenters on Spotify. Ben, Grace, Loden, Gina, K.E. Bradley Sharp had a cute a witty comment about me and Florence. Point of academic theological rigor. How can David, the statue by Michelangelo, be the finest man Julia, have ever seen when, in fact, Michael B. Jordan exists? There's truth to that. Michael B. Jordan is incredibly fine, but Michael B. Jordan is a man. He is but a man. And David,
he is but a man.
The inanimate object, he will never ghost me.
He doesn't have a phone.
He's eternal.
He's not real. So that, I think, makes him superior to a real man, right?
Yeah. I see where you're going there. He's more
He'll never do
reliable.
Me dirty. Yeah.
More trustworthy.
I know what I'm going to get, which is nothing, but that's fine.
But is Michael B. Jordan married? I don't remember.
No,
I don't know.
He's dating.
All right. Then feel free to hit Julia up. That's really what we're saying. Go ahead, Michael B. Jordan.
Yeah, Michael, give me
You're
a
in
call.
the running. Shout outs to @Trumpeting Angel, @Candace Chatman 2761, @Kiri Sully 399, and your husband, whom you mentioned in your comment. Also, a big thanks to Kyle 1974, probably 1974, who said on YouTube, my church had a book club and discussion on the religion of whiteness, which is a book we mentioned by Michael O. Emerson. Kyle says they're in a UCC church. It's simply horrifying. It's an incredible read and well-researched, but certainly makes calling myself a Christian as a white man very hard. It's shameful. Thank you for the podcast and the work you do. Thank you, Kyle, for being part of a church, for sticking it out, for showing up, for reading what you need to read, even when it makes you uncomfortable. Keep doing what you're doing too.
Yeah, that was awesome. I absolutely love that. It made me actually just super happy.
I do wonder if the username is Kyle H 1974.
But that would make sense for being born in 1974. So there you go, Kyle H.
Yeah, you go.
Thank you, Kyle H.
Good catch, Wesley.
And we also received another comment from John Reslog 3575. And I just want to highlight a portion of it. He writes, I'm a 7-year-old white man who was married to an incredible woman before she passed 6 years ago. She was incredible because she taught me that the things or positions or rewards were okay, but meh. Experience is what really mattered. She would much rather go somewhere than go shopping. What you talked about in your broadcast is spot on. I'm not sure if us baby boomers were coddled, but a lot of this group seems to have drowned out the ability to think of others. That material possessions, be it cars, houses, stocks, or holding a position of power, are important. It's hard to believe that after 70, 80, 90 years of living, that is all you learned. Really, I enjoyed your podcast. Although I see myself as a spiritual being and not specifically a Christian, your podcast gave me hope as to your non-demonizing of others. I so appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for your comments, John. We yeah, I hearing it reflected back that we're not crazy for just sort of seeing the things that we're seeing and being frustrated in the ways that we're frustrated is very affirming, and I appreciate that.
And John, also sorry for your grief. I hope that we're thinking of you and we're holding you in prayer. That's all.
Yeah, no, that was definitely, it was like a beautiful tribute, both to his wife and what she was able to teach him. And I thought that was lovely. And also just the ability to be self-reflective, which is one of our primary criticisms on the episode, is how a lot of people in that generation lack the ability to do that. So thank you all of you who are commenting, leaving, just know that we do read them all. I engage with every comment that is worthy of engagement. Some I just kind of let go, but all the good ones are the people I will definitely engage with. So on today's episode, we are going to be discussing a progressive Christian perspective on economic policy, which can sound boring, but in truth, we're really talking about like how we might think about money in light of our own theological beliefs. And to kind of set the table, if you will, this topic emerged because of just what's being written recently about just how much grift, like just the grift of the Trump family is just it's insane. Like it is, I don't even know if insane feels like it's like not even a large enough word to describe how much money he is making. It is in I don't know if it's in the billions yet, but it's got to be, it's in the hundreds of millions in terms of how much money he's making on particularly on like cryptocurrency and other the kind of meme coin stuff, which is just insane.
Dr. Carter, can
yeah.
you define the word grift? Because I think that's like kind of becoming a buzzword. How do you understand that? When you say he's grifting or it's a grift, what do you mean by that?
That's a great question. I'll tell you what I mean, and then maybe it's funny I can Google it, because this is how I've been using it or how I've been taught to use it. Basically, it's people who are persuading and convincing people to invest in a product or a service that will not actually help them or do the thing you say it's going to do. You're convincing them to invest in a product, for instance, when you openly are just taking their money. Like they're really not going to get anything value back for their investment. And I think particularly when you talk about Trump,
it's a scam.
It's a scam, pyramid scheme. I mean, there's any number of these things you can use to describe it. But I think the part that's messed it up is these people like genuinely believe, right? This is like how I feel like it's like prosperity gospel. Like these are true believers. And I've been limited, in using the word cult on this podcast, because I know that can make some people upset, or I don't know, maybe not anybody listening to this podcast. But from a religious studies perspective, so much of what you see happening in MAGA world is in alignment with the cult. Like there really is. That's how I was taught to define a cult. That's basically what it is. So Wesley, I know you're going to say something.
Oh, I guess one of the things that, as we were sort of preparing for this, the thing that I couldn't figure out was there's sort of like these small grifts. I'll talk about this when I sort of do a little bit of deeper, but like there's the Trump watches, the hats, the merchandise, these things that are just his branding for the purpose of enriching himself. And then there's the bigger ones, which we'll talk about, like the stuff happening with crypto, that isn't really about a mom and pop like paying $60 to $1,000. It's millions and millions of dollars at the same time. So as when we're talking about it, I think we're talking about sort of even the small scale sort of like individual like exploitation that he's doing to his followers, but also the bigger stuff that's happening on a international scale.
Yeah, Blair.
You said someone should Google it. So a grift, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is a petty or small scale swindle. And I would say
there's nothing small scale about what's happening.
There's nothing small scale about this. I think we've moved from like grift to full on con. Like this is a con. People are being not just swindled, but like conned out of their money. It's a lie. It's a coercion, and it's a problem.
And it's to an extent. And again, we have to save some for when we get to that part of the podcast. It's a quid pro quo. It is you give me this, I give you that, and which is a problem when you're in politics. When it's money, that's when it's a problem in politics. When it's money, because that is illegal. It is illegal. Whew. All right. To the podcast. And so we're gonna talk about that, talk about Trump and the big beautiful bill. Or actually it's called I just realized this when I was looking at it. It's called the Big Beautiful Bill Act. That's what
Yeah, it's literally its name. And I know that, like, I also get annoyed when, like, Democratic representatives do, like, smart, like, whatever acronyms for their titles, but it's like, good God, big beautiful bill.
But isn't
It's
that like
embarrassing.
ATM machine, like automatic teller machine, like big beautiful bill act?
Yes, it's redundant. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I feel like I want to derail this any further.
So, Dr. Grutter, from a theological perspective, why is it a problem to grift people? Like, if people want to give you their money, if they
That's
think
such a good
like if they
question.
want to give you their money,
Yeah.
who are we to say they can't?
And honestly, I would say that's a great question because that is the perspective of far too many Christians who don't think theologically about money, or they come from a prosperity framed mindset where they believe that their Christianity, right, their degree of salvation, if you will, or something about their relationship with God, um, means that they should have some economic benefit. And the more money they have, clearly the more blessed that they are, which is just terrible theology. That's not consistent with what's in the biblical text. It's not really consistent with what's within the Christian tradition. It is at best, you might want to say it's a bastardization of John Calvin and this idea of like, reformed theology that certain people are chosen, and they're already, and you will know that they are chosen, and they are already saved, if you will, based on the way in which God blesses them. But ultimately, what I believe is that most Christians, let's just say the average Christian, we really kind of think about what we should do with our money. I believe it should be directly related to how we think about God. It should be informed about how we relate to God. And at the same time, well, I think most people know that they have an understanding. Well, how I think about God should inform how I think about my money or how I spend my money. We often take the current economic realities as like a given, right? Or that they're just fixed and that they can't be changed. And so then we wonder, well, if I have this particular kind of theology, given the realities of the world, what should I do with my money? And so you can think of like capitalism as a given, or you can think, a certain kind of capitalism, or, socialism or whatever, rather than recognizing these systems are created by humans and actually can be changed. And even beyond that, that the way in which we think about money, like the way in which we actually believe, like the ends, as I'm going to say in a minute, determines how and in what ways we the good that our money can do. I think I would argue, and so in this sense, a better way, or I would say at least the way I tend to think about it, and definitely the way I implicitly teach about it, is to focus on the outcome that I believe is most in alignment with the goal of the beloved community. So I'm thinking about, how am I spending my money? How am I investing my money in ways that actually are going to build us as a human species closer to the beloved community? And so thinking about economics from a theological point of view means that we must take seriously the ends of human life, right? If the goal of our lives are to grow closer to God, if the goal of our life is to create the beloved community, the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven, then we need to be thinking about how we spend our money that moves us toward that goal. Like that's the ethical framework that I teach. That's what I know I have. I won't say it's what I've been taught, but it's what I've come to believe, probably in light of my own poverty, but it's in a lot of theological reflection. And for me, you know, I actually had this realization when I was finishing my master's degree in a class, like independent study I took with Marjorie Suhaki. And I wrote this little paper on this verse right here. I'm going to read Matthew 6:22, where it says, "The eye is the lamp of the body. Therefore, if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how terrible that darkness will be. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you will be loyal to one and have contempt for the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." And for some of you grew up, you knew that was God and mammon or whatever. But I remember writing a paper in this independent study I had with her, and the comment she had in the conversation that ended up evolving out of that was, I learned from a young age, because of my poverty, that I needed to take seriously my relationship with God, and that if I ordered my life in that way, that ultimately financially my financial decisions would be in an alignment with who I wanted to become. And it just was a different kind of orientation than being concerned about money first and foremost. I think I learned that money, that I wasn't going to have control over how much money I can make as much as I want to because of who I am and what I look like and where I come from. And so that for me is how I believe Christians ought to be thinking about money. We be thinking about our goal. If our goal is the kingdom of God, right? What do we need to do? What do we need to invest in to move us toward that end? And what we see happening with the Republican Party, especially, but with President Trump specifically, is that is not their end. They have a whole different telos. Their telos is making cash. And so, Wesley, I know you did some, you have some thoughts on this to kind of help us also do the political framing, if you will, for the conversation we want to have today.
Oh yeah. So you asked me to sort of like document or just sort of explain some of the grifting that's happening by the Trump administration, by his Trump family, by its different business organizations. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, there's the obvious grifts. There's those watches, there's the merchandise, there's that idiotic AI Trump Gaza video that was like an attempt at a real estate venture. We'll see if that'll come to fruition. I hate it. In his first presidency, in his first term, the Trump Hotel in D.C. as a way to funnel money to him. In that first Trump presidency, he was charging the Secret Service exorbitant rates to stay at Mar-a-Lago. So these are just like small examples of like the way that he is using his position to further enrich him and his family. But then we get into like the less obvious grifts, like selling access. There was a recent MAGA Inc. crypto dinner at Mar-a-Lago, and MAGA Inc. is a super PAC that supports Donald Trump. This dinner allowed people to, the purchasers, the holders of some of his meme coins, to be to get a seat at the table, to be able to interface, to potentially influence the president's decisions. And for those who don't know, and I'm not sure, a meme coin, there's a handful, but like the ones that we most notably know about is the Trump coin and also the Melania coin. And so people buy these in the hopes that it'll one day become popular and that they get to sell it to someone else and make a profit off that. In this process, they've made up to $350 million as part of like some reporting that I was reading, and we'll include these in the show notes. Because the Trump organization, they own 60% of World Liberty Financial. It's a company that's led by Trump and his family, and they receive 75% of its revenue. So any sort of like exchange between people purchasing these coins, there's a fee associated that goes directly to Trump and his associates, Trump and his family. So these are examples of like self-dealing, insider trading. This is, as you mentioned, Dr. Carter, a pay-to-play scheme. And, it allows for a lot of influencing, especially from like foreign nationals. Because one of the things about crypto is that there aren't regulations. There's no accountability. Whereas like with other financial disclosures as part of fundraising, there's structures and regulations that make sure that we know who is funding to the best of our system's ability. But at this point, it's estimated that the Trump organizations writ large, through its various ventures, meme coins, crypto, Liberty Financial, have made $3 billion in money. So, and this is again largely unregulated. One of the videos that I looked up is that
wait, $3 billion in
with a B,
but since 2016.
I don't remember if they specifically added a date, but I think it's as of like the last election cycle, as when he was running, and some of this
in November,
around the time that
the meme coin stuff started alongside the campaign. So like
in September
2023, 2024.
Yeah.
$3 billion.
And that's what like people can find out, because not only did Donald Trump dismantle a Justice Department unit that was in charge of investigating crypto fraud, like the deregulation of this industry, or the lack of regulation, means that there's so much that we do not know, like through Truth Social, like how much is being sold through there, what kind of access is being provided. There's just too much opacity in the crypto market to know
There's no
exactly how
oversight.
much how big the grift is.
And the people who buy it may never get anything out of it, right? Because crypto
Correct.
is only worth what you can use it on. And like Bitcoin is barely accepted for transactions internationally.
Exactly. An article from Reuters writes that the Trump's family investment in World Liberty ties the personal fortunes of a sitting U.S. president to an asset class that sits at the outer edges of both risk and regulation. So it's like the grift is no longer small; it's huge.
Yeah. It's huge. It is like the size of a nation state. Like that's what, like that's really
It is
what
literally the size of our nation, not just any nation state, the largest nation state that has ever existed.
Yeah, and
in
it's
human
created
history.
a way for people to pay him anonymously, to donate to him without it being tracked. It's just there's just so much that we don't know as a result of how new this is, as a result of how the gerontocracy is just fully unfamiliar with this new asset class.
Yeah.
So it's all these things combined that create this opportunity for him and his associates at the expense of everyone else.
And listen, people have always paid to play in politics. We have always had legal grift. We have always had legal, by quid pro quo. Like, the wheels came off when Citizens United fell,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So we used to have laws that said you can't do this. You can't pay for dinner with the president. You can't make anonymous donations. And Citizens United specifically said that corporations could not make
Corporations
contributions.
are people.
When that fell and it was acknowledged that corporations could have opinions, it had made a whole bunch of other complicated things like the Hobby Lobby, and now corporations can have a religious perspective, which I have problems with. But like this crypto thing is like a whole nother level, because it's just straight up like taking people's money. They're just like, they get nothing from it except maybe the ear of the president, maybe.
Yeah, that's one thing I was gonna say is we'll put a link in the show notes. So if you take out the 1,600 some odd people that Trump pardoned for January 6th, as he got, after he was elected, and look at he's pardoned 60 people since he's been in office, which, typically people don't pardon to the end of their presidency, but whatever. So about 20% of those 60 people actually gave money towards his election, right? Like that's what's wild to me. It's like there was one pardon that just happened where I think someone's mother bought a bunch of Trump meme coins, was able to, at that dinner at Mar-a-Lago, and then a few days later her son was pardoned. And so it's that kind of like super obvious where it's like that's terrible.
But it's also like the examples where the Trump and his associates are suing media companies and using, the threat of the federal government getting involved in your business becomes enough of a rationale for these organizations to capitulate and just settle in the tune of millions of dollars to him and his associates. It's like wild.
Politicians in the US in general, becoming a politician makes you wealthier, which is effed up, should not be the case. And again, there used to be written rules, but also like standards of practice, right? So there actually were not laws. Part of the problem we've had with the Supreme Court is there are not laws that say the Supreme Court can't receive certain gifts, right? Now they're having to come up with rules because it was no one ever thought a Supreme Court justice would take a bribe, basically. And you think back to Jimmy Carter, who sold his peanut farm while he was president so that he could not be accused of making agricultural decisions that would benefit him and lead to his prosperity. Such a thing, you'd be considered stupid for doing such a thing as a politician now.
I mean, I think Trump literally said it'd be stupid to not take the airplane he's getting from Qatar that's going to cost us a bunch of money. And so I know before we started recording, Julia, we were talking about like you know, all of us are in different financial places in our life, but like basically what you see inevitably happening in this is like if you are okay with just exploiting people, like that's how you get rich. Like like getting like it's so hard to get to become wealthy doing it like, hey, I just want to work hard and maybe save some money. It's like no, you got to sprinkle in some exploitation on
Yeah,
there.
like
And it's not even just on the conservative side. Like this is also happening on the Democratic side. There's a whole
Yeah.
investment app that just follows Nancy Pelosi's trades
Mm.
because her portfolio outperforms everyone else's. Because why? We can only guess.
I mean,
Because we don't want to get sued.
I think that the gag of all of this, I mean, there are many things to gag about, but like, is that we read Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. And it's like just recognizing that just in our universe, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? So for as rich as Donald Trump is, or as rich as Elon Musk is, or Jeff Bezos, there is going to be someone that is equally as poor. And that you cannot, like you said, like it's not possible to amass these types of wealth without harming large swaths of the population. And I say this all the time. We live in the wealthiest nation that has ever existed in human history. None of the problems that we have to be problems. They don't have to be a problem. No, there's no real reason, right, that anyone in our nation should be unhoused. There's no real reason. We could afford to house everyone. We could afford for everyone to have food. We have the money for it, but it's being hoarded.
Well, I think two things. First, if you had on your bingo card, Julia would be the first person to talk about the laws of thermodynamics on this podcast. You win. So there we go.
The girl in STEM.
I
STEM
definitely have
girly.
it.
And
Get it,
there's
girl.
equal and opposite reaction.
I was like, look at that. That's not some thermodynamics. What? No, some physics around here. There's a quote in the book that I might be able to find in Desmond's book, where basically he's talking about how things got to be this way. I think it's a chapter he talks about on welfare. And he says the third reason things could be like this is because we want it to be that way. We're totally okay with it being this way. Like, and that's the reason. He's like, people don't want to acknowledge that. People don't want to talk about it. But he's like, perhaps things are set up this way because that's the way we want it. We want it such that our government actually supports mostly middle and upper middle and wealthy people to the detriment of the poor. But we don't want to frame it like that. Psychologically, it's better for us to trick ourselves to believing it's something else. And we're going to talk much more about Desmond's book because it's so good and anger inducing.
I mean, Can we just talk about it now?
Yeah, actually, you know what? Let's talk about it now because I can talk about it. We can talk about the theology when we're doing the constructive piece too, because I guess what I'll start by saying, what I didn't know, and then Blair, I'll toss it over to you, is I got through the majority of this book and I was thinking he uses a lot of religious language. Like he uses the word sin and stuff like that. I was like, well, that's interesting. But, you know, we all kind of know what that is. And then Blair was like, oh, did you, you know, she's like, it makes so much sense that he's a PK. And I was like, what? He's a PK. And so when you read in the prologue or the beginning of the book, he talks about a transformative experience for him is when his father was a pastor out in Flagstaff, Arizona, and lost his job, and just how hard that was on the family. And you know, for me, it helps make a lot of these things make sense. That he had a kind of moral formation that pushed him towards this way of thinking. And so that's something that really resonated with me in terms of why I can't recommend the book enough. And I would tell you to make sure you read it, like maybe with a glass of wine or whatever you need to just take the edge off. But
I had to take breaks. I had to take breaks. I listened to it on audiobook and I had to take breaks because it would just make me feel so angry and sick. And so we're talking about Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond, who also wrote Evicted, which is also an excellent book. But you naming that he was a pastor's kid, and he talks about learning about poverty because of being a pastor's kid, and how I think a lot of people argue that we could fix these deficits in the budget if we just tax the churches. And the reality is that most churches are under 100 people in the United States, and their pastor is probably already qualifying for food stamps. So if you tax the churches in the United States, you might make some money off of the wealthiest, like Joel Osteen's and the Mormon Church, but you in general would be decimating people who are already living in poverty, who are deeply committed to helping the economic and spiritual situation of the people in their communities. And it used to be that pastors, because especially in the mainline tradition, we have to get a master's degree. And we've talked about this before on the podcast. We have to be educated frequently. In rural areas, the pastor of the local community is the most educated person in the town.
Yep.
And it is our responsibility as pastors to understand economics, to understand how money works, to understand how it motivates us, and how it's been corrupted and how it's exploiting our people, and to push back against that. And so, I mean, I think the problem is that in progressive Christianity, because of the grift of the prosperity gospel, we have swung too far the opposite direction, and we don't talk about money enough in our churches, when in reality, how we spend our money, both how we spend our money and how we accumulate money, is a reflection of what we think about humanity and ourselves, and about who God is and how God works. Like, budgets are moral documents. And it's not to say like everybody has to have a job and earn their money by like doing social good. If that's all we did, there would be no money to do the social good. And that's the difficult balance, is like, somebody's got to earn the money so that we can, quote unquote, redistribute, but only because we've created and allowed a system that allows for the creation of massive amounts of wealth at the expense and exploitation of the majority of the world, and particularly the majority of the American people. And that's ultimately, and I'm going to stop soon, that's ultimately the thesis of Desmond's book, is that we have poverty in America because we have accepted exploitation of the majority of Americans as the status quo for our life together and for our social being. And that is a sin. He calls it a sin in the book, and that is a sin, to accumulate wealth as a standard, which requires the exploitation of the masses. That is not the kingdom of God. And we could choose to do something differently.
And I think a lot of that also has to do with the fact that I think most Americans just haven't grasped how vast the wealth inequality in America actually is. There's a video that I'll put in the show notes that sort of really just breaks it down. Like, what do people think the distribution of wealth is in America? And then what is the actual distribution? It is quite crazy.
I think that the thing that I always like the most about Matthew Desmond in both of his books is the way that he addresses race.
Yes.
So he's so honest about it. And one of the things that he said in this book that I had not considered was, I've been thinking all morning about the fact that MAGA, like the MAGA movement, really does stem from a thing that he mentioned is during integration, it was very easy for like the coastal elites and like wealthy liberals to push for integration, but that they didn't do it. So poor whites were forced to integrate, and wealthy whites didn't have to, because they pulled their kids out of public school and put them into private school, and they were able to build these high walls, and that has seeded resentment, and it has damaged class consciousness in a way that I don't know how we're going to get it back, because we are in it. We're so deeply in it.
It is. And like, you have people, who have written about this. I'm trying to look I'm actually looking to see the title of the book, right? I can't see it from here, but it's Hammer and Hoe, is a professor at UCLA who's talked about communism and socialism among like Southern post, like after enslavement, so free blacks and poor whites, and how you had these moments of solidarity. Robin D.G. Kelly. And as you said, Julia, like the fomentation of resentment is what has created a barrier for actual solidarity because you place the blame on other people you think that are getting something they don't deserve or getting the same benefits as you, rather than the wealthy who, and they may be on the coast or maybe not, but are able to isolate themselves. And I think, underneath all this, to an extent, is obviously selfishness. The fact that some people can just be totally okay with exploiting others and think that that's fine, that they are okay with creating a class of people, through their policies that they know are going to be exploited, and believe, broadly speaking, that that's fine. But, even thinking about it as it relates to where we are today, I think so many folks who study class, don't really want to wrestle with the realities of race. And that's what I love about Desmond's book, as you said. Like, I've had students in my systematic theology class, I have one student in particular who talked about mass incarceration, and he had already had a PhD, but he's going to get an MDiv to be a clergy. And he was so just convinced that the way I talked about race didn't take class seriously. And I was like, I don't think you understand how much class is tied to race in this country. And I'm like, is how it works. Like, the only way you create class in this country is through the lens of race, by creating the caste. And that's what I told him. I was like, you may be better talking about caste, CASTE, as opposed to thinking about class in this way. But it's hard because it brings up a lot of stuff for people. It really brings up a lot of emotional responses, because it runs counter to the idea that the narratives that Black people are lazy, other people don't want to work hard, or Latinx folks are lazy. And I want to just really briefly, and then I read this, and then I'll go back to you, Julia. It was there's a survey that they have been doing since 1972 that basically talks about people's beliefs in people's work ethic. And so Desmond has it in the book. He says half the country appears to believe that social benefits from government make people lazy. Who we think benefits from that aid also deeply colors our views. Studies have consistently identified two longstanding beliefs harbored by the American public. First, Americans tend to believe, wrongly, that most welfare recipients are Black. This is true for both liberals and conservatives. Second, many Americans still believe Blacks have a low work ethic. In 1972, social scientists conducted a survey of adults called the General Social Survey. The survey is still going strong, allowing us to track trends over time. In 1990, the survey asked Americans to rate how lazy or hardworking they thought different people groups were, based on a 7-point scale, with 7 presenting the belief that almost everyone in the group is lazy. That year, 6% of Americans who cared to answer that question thought whites were generally lazy, giving them a score of 5, 6, or 7. But 44% of Americans reported feeling that way about Black Americans. The most recent iteration of the survey, conducted in 2021, found that more than 1 in 7 Americans still saw Black Americans as lazy. Anti-Black racism hardens Americans' antagonism towards social benefits. And I'm just like, I've met so few people who work harder than like the poor Black people I grew up with, just exhausting themselves to not be poor. And it's like, it boggles the mind. Now, I can see maybe you thinking they're not good with their money. Not that just because you're just not around them, you don't know, right? But to think they're lazy, I'm like, come on, anyway, all right.
I love that so much because I think it was Skippy Gates. I can't remember. I was reading something at one point and they talked about how during enslavement, one of the anti-abolitionist arguments, like one of the reasons that they said that Black people wanted their freedom was because they were lazy. So it's like, it's so funny to me because you have a nation that was built on Black labor, right? And then as soon as Black people want to be paid for their labor, it's because they're lazy. They just don't want to work. So like, and what I was going to say earlier is I think that one of the things that we rarely acknowledge are the ways that these sorts of like ancestral traumas harm all of us. Like we think about ancestral trauma as harming the descendants of enslaved people, but we rarely talk about the ways that it harms the descendants of the enslavers. Like, you can't tell me your soul is good and you can't tell me your DNA isn't changed by the violence that your ancestors perpetrated onto oppressed individuals for whatever reason in whatever situation. And I think that like the ways in which we in this nation have so much difficulty just talking about race, it comes from that. Like white people, I've had white people say to me, there's nothing worse can happen to them than being called racist. Like they think that is worse than doing racism. Whether they are actually engaged, like whether they do or say something racist or not, like the worst thing that can happen is someone saying that you are racist. They think that that's, and like, but that is a trigger from their own ancestral trauma that they can't, like, that they carry with them. It's harmful for everyone. These systems hurt everyone.
Everest, and we already have a date recorded next week. We'll be having Everest back on the podcast. But one thing that they taught me that I found really fascinating was they call it like the horseshoe effect of talking about racism. How you start on, so for those of you who are watching on YouTube, people see me doing my hands. Like you could start at one point saying, okay, I'm like super, basically you're racist, right? And if you have a horseshoe, you can imagine it goes all the way around like that. And you can end with people here who have a more understanding of racism, perhaps on like an x-axis, but still not say anything about racism because they're nervous around saying the wrong thing. You get to this point where you have to give people have to understand they have to gain confidence and facility in knowing that you have to engage in the conversation. And as you do that, you learn how to have the conversation better. But by just simply learning something and not speaking about it, ultimately you're not doing anything different than the people who actually believe in, who support and uphold racist policies. And so it's like you said, I've seen this at my son's school, the trauma of people feeling afraid to be labeled as something rather than actually recognizing the harm that by not talking about racism actually is doing. And it's ridiculous. I think with respect to the economic policies, what I want us to shift to a little bit now is at least talking about the bill, Trump's Big Beautiful Bill Act, what it does. Sorry, I can't say it without laughing because I'm like, it's so
ridiculous. It's like,
it's like he didn't watch Schoolhouse Rock. I was like, it can't be a bill and an act. It's a bill, and then when it's done, it's an act. But okay, whatever. I know he didn't watch Schoolhouse Rock, so I don't know why I'm even pretending. And I know, Blair, you had done some research on specific things in that bill that maybe you want to discuss. But ultimately, the Cliff Notes that I want to say before I turn it over is it just is creating so much. First of all, they're just lying about it all over the place. Like Mike Johnson is just telling a bunch of lies about what it doesn't do. He's like, oh, it's not going to add to the deficit, but it will. But it consistently, it's taking money from the poor essentially to give to the rich. Ultimately, it's like the inverse of Robin Hood.
Yeah, and that's ultimately what Desmond is talking about in his book as well, is that the greatest recipients of state-sponsored welfare are the wealthiest individuals in the United States. It's people who own houses, it's people who run businesses, it's corporations themselves, that we give out way more in tax credits and take on debt and deficit and give out corporate welfare to corporations, to business owners, to people who own their own homes. And like the statistic he mentioned that I felt convicted by, because I've always thought if we didn't spend so much on the military, then we could solve poverty. And one of the stats is like, we actually spend like twice as much on corporate tax breaks and tax breaks for the wealthy than we do on military spending. And
yeah,
I felt so convicted by that, because I'm absolutely one of those people that's like, defund the military. And no, that's not actually where the majority of the money goes.
Blair, one thing I want to say real quick before I toss it back to you is, for me, this was a part of the book that convicted me as well, because what he said was people who get money or receive welfare from the government in the form of these tax breaks, in the form of the earned income credit, in the form of having college savings accounts that aren't taxed, in the form of the money you save owning a property, like the money you get to write off for, owning a house, the interest that you can write off. All these things that we get, corporations offering health insurance, like that's untaxed. Like all this stuff that we get as individuals counts as welfare, but because it isn't money that the government sends to us, rather it's money that we get to keep, we don't think about it as welfare. And I will be honest, like I was like, holy, I have never thought about it like welfare. I've always thought about it like, honestly, I've thought about it like I'm just keeping more of what I've earned. And I was convicted. It was a helpful reframing because I was like, oh, what I love about the book for me is that it helped me realize how I am a part of the problem. But now I'm not the worst part. There's people who do admit, I'm not the worst part. Now, like we all moving towards Christian perfection. We all can grow and be better people. But I was like, oh no, I also am a part of the problem because of my thinking about this is fundamentally flawed, and it might be better for them to reframe how they talk about how we receive our benefits, so that we understand we're actually getting these benefits rather than poor people just getting the quote unquote welfare benefits.
Well, that's why I really appreciate there's this blog post I'll include in the show notes from, what is the organization? The organization is the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. That's what it's called. And they have a blog post called Breaking Down the One Big Beautiful Bill. And the way that they break it down is negative for changes that will like basically take money from the existing government budget, and then and they put that in red, and then gray positive for things that will be sources of income. And as you go through this sort of line by line, the way they've summarized it is the place that this big beautiful bill is recommending that we give welfare. Essentially, if it's a red number, that means it's welfare. It means it's money we're not that the government previously was taking, and now we're not taking it anymore. So it's no longer income. So the things like no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, which is really strange because both of those are saying we're going to allow corporations to exploit our workers and then let those workers keep more of the money. So it's actually like that's a welfare for the business to say like, oh, well, you want fewer workers, but you want your workers you have to do more overtime, or you want workers to be willing to take a taxed or a tip rate, which is like disgustingly low, like $2.43 or something an hour, so that they can earn more tips because those tips won't be taxed. It's taking the onus off the corporations to actually pay their employees equitably, and then rewarding the corporations and the people who allow themselves to be exploited by allowing them to keep more of that money, right? It's like literally that system that Desmond is describing. No tax on car loans, health savings account expansions. That's saying instead of just providing you adequate health insurance coverage and making sure that health insurance costs stay low, we're going to let you keep some money in a health savings account so that you can cover the exorbitant costs of our health insurance policy. The creation of MAGA accounts, which is like another savings thing. Expensing for factories, right? So we want to increase manufacturing in the US, but we know those aren't going to be high paying jobs. Let's see. Rural emergency hospital under Medicare. We actually probably do want that because we need more rural hospitals. But it's who's going to be allowed to build them. Like which giant health corporation is going to make bank by building these rural hospitals and getting that government subsidy. And then the things that they're making money on are things that harm the poorest and most destitute. So, or harm our environment. So they're repealing the EV tax credit and saying that's a positive $191 billion, phasing out energy production and manufacturing credits. They've ended the de minimis shipment, so that what used to be that if you imported something under $800, it wasn't subject to tariffs. Who's doing that? It's people who can't afford to buy their like basic necessities down at Target, so they're ordering them from Temu for pennies on the dollar. But they're basically saying, no, you can't have access to that direct shipping anymore. You have to go through the middleman of an American corporation. They're also spending money on a border wall and then increasing fees to apply for visas. They're also increasing fees for asylum applicants. They're increasing diversity immigrant fees. They're just like, they're making money on the poorest people and handing it over in tax credits and cuts to the wealthiest, the people who don't need them. I mean, I could go through this whole list and just explain how each one of these is just a massive violation of the moral call to care for the poor and the immigrant and the widow. And I just, it feels so black and white to me that we should not be subsidizing Walmart profits by creating SNAP benefits, but then also lowering those SNAP benefits, SNAP being food stamps, and making it harder to get food stamps. And we do that. We approve of food stamps because it means Walmart doesn't have to pay their people a living wage. I just am so frustrated that this is what we've created and that more people can't see how obvious it is.
Was it Martin Luther King Jr. who used to always say it's socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor?
Mhm.
Which is what I feel like. Is that who said it?
I don't know if it was. I don't know.
I'm
I
not
don't know
sure,
if it
but
was-
that's
said
a
it.
true statement.
Somebody
I
said
don't-
it.
Yeah. We'll say Julia Black said it. All
I
right.
said it. You heard it here first, kids. Socialism for the rich, capitalism for the poor. I think often about trying to have these kinds of conversations with people who have means and how difficult it can be. I think
Mhm.
when you have not experienced poverty and it's all theoretical, it's very easy to be like, oh, well, that will never work. There's always a reason that it will never work. You hear people say often, like, socialism it will fail. It'll eventually fail. It can't sustain it. All of these things, as though, we're over here getting our goods from the Silk Road market, as though every single economic system doesn't eventually fail. That's what happens. Either you change it as social consciousness and society progresses, or it collapses and it fails. There are choices. We don't have to let the entire thing come crumbling down. And like, people are quick to forget, Rome was huge and then it fell. And when it fell, people lost. Like, these people in France was having indoor plumbing and all of a sudden they didn't, right? Like, everything that you have can go away. Everything that we have can vanish from poverty. And like, it's easy for people who have money and who feel comfortable to be lured into a false sense of safety. But one of the things that Matthew talks about in this book is the fact that we are all, it is much easier to lose it than to get it.
Yeah, I think people actually probably don't even know that they had indoor plumbing in ancient Rome. Like, they had flushing, what we would broadly speaking would call a flushing toilet, like what constantly run. I mean, that's how far advanced they had gotten as a society. And then as you have a collapse, you have just an ultimate collapse. And I think, to your point, Julia, about the way people talk about systems, if you were to ask someone in the early 1600s whether or not capitalism could exist, they would have said no. This feudal system is what's been around for 1,000 years. Like, no one would have thought we would have moved from a feudal system where people literally lived on a land to what we have now. So that's just go ahead.
And we've seen capitalism fail within our own lifetime. When in 2008, the entire financial system collapsed. And the government, the only reason it couldn't sustain itself, and the government injected money into it. That is the reason. So like, the idea that capitalism itself doesn't fail, what do you think the Great Depression was?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, and then this gets to like the point that we made earlier that Blair was making, like, we've ultimately created a system that we won't allow to fail because it benefits, especially in America, I should say. We've created a system that we won't allow to fail because it benefits the middle and every class above that. And so, and thinking about like, okay, how do we, like, what does the Bible say about us? Like, how do we begin to respond to this kind of way of thinking, to push back on some of these claims, and to think fundamentally differently about how we engage each other and how we think about money. So there's a couple of things I want to lift up and then toss it over to y'all before we start moving towards doing the constructive, more positive piece. But one is, the Bible talks about money a lot because it is written by displaced poor people. I think so. As much as you hear, and this is what so frustrates me about Christians who will talk about sexuality as if the Bible talks about sex all the time, when the Bible, if it talks about the body, is talking about property ownership, right? It will talk a lot about how women's bodies should be owned, basically, or how things are commodities, but not nearly say anything about money, not say anything about wealth. And I'm like, the Bible talks about wealth all the time.
Even when the Bible is talking about bodies, it's talking about the economy.
Exactly.
It's about economics.
It's about economics. And I think that the fact that people refuse to acknowledge that because it's makes them have to hold themselves accountable to how we think about money is what frustrates me. And so the Bible uses it basically is an argument about how we live our neighbors. It talks about the distribution of goods as a way for demonstrating your love for your neighbor. And so in this sense, even if you think about it from whether it be the Hebrew Bible and the idea about not coveting and how that's supposed to be extremely important, how you have the idea of the Sabbath in the Jubilee year, right? How you have like these things built into systems that are supposed to be about radical redistribution of goods and making sure workers aren't exploited, taking time off, all the way through Jesus and the Eucharist, where you have in Acts 2, you have a real sharing of food. Like you have a real sharing of property in common. You have people who actually like put their resources together to survive and thrive and to support each other. Like this is what Jesus was talking about. He was taking the logical arguments of the Hebrew Bible and putting them into practical context of his time, And so he's looking at the parable of the Good Samaritan and saying it's about how you love and treat your neighbor. And it's more than just about charity, right? It's really about like transforming lives so that we actually can live together. Like again, Matthew 25, he's like, I was hungry, you gave me food. I was naked and you clothed me. Like it's actual material goods that Jesus was talking about, not just some kind of imagined idea. And I think for me, those are some of the themes that you see throughout the text, both Hebrew Bible and New Testament, that I think sometimes you can get lost because we're not paying attention to what it actually says. We are more thinking about how can we use it to justify what we want to do, right? Rather than looking at what it actually says.
Well, I think so much of the difficulty of that reality is that it is so counter to capitalism.
Yeah.
And so when we grow up steeped in these capitalist ideas and structures, of course, we're going to downplay ideas or beliefs that are going to push us in an opposite direction, because it's also like to move towards a more socialist or more to a playing field where it's a lot more fair means that if you come from a wealthy background or if you come from a privileged background, you have to give up some of what you think you've earned so that other people aren't in destitute poverty.
And I think this is where, again, getting back to Desmond's book, Wesley, I seriously thought, he makes 2 points that I thought are helpful. One is in other countries, the government essentially does your taxes for you. He talks about the UK,
I think
love Australia. That. And that's another thing too. I was like, basically they send
all
you
think we're bonkers.
It's crazy.
Yeah. They send you an invoice. They're like, hey, this is our calculations. This is what we think you owe or what you get. And then you can sign in and return it. And if you think it's wrong, then you sign another line and say, no, I think it's incorrect. And then you work it out. Like you do the math with them to figure it out. And if we did something like that, A, that would prevent a lot of fraud. But B, there's a way to structure it such that you can actually name things for what they are. Like, I should not have been surprised that the money that we save on these things is actually a form of welfare. Like, you should call it that. Be like, this is the like
welfare benefits.
Yeah, like welfare benefits. And like that way you just know, like, oh, this is because I'm paying into a system. This is what I get back from the system, right? Just call it for what it is. So then people you won't feel as much like I'm gonna lose something, right? Because you recognize, oh, I'm already investing in this thing that I'm getting stuff for, right?
That we all invest in it, and then we all get things back.
Exactly.
And that if you wind up destitute, you don't need to worry because there is a system in place that you have already contributed to that you then too, you also, and hopefully you don't, but if you do, it's there for you as well. And if you never need to avail yourself of it, then that is a blessing, but that doesn't mean that no one else should be able to do it. I hate it
because well, I was gonna say is you never know when you might, because so many people end up poor because of a health crisis, because something like that. Like healthcare is I think the number one driver of poverty, if I'm not mistaken, is somebody gets sick and then they cannot go to work, and that is one of the biggest things. Blair.
Yeah, we haven't named this yet, but the way that Desmond describes this is that we have accepted a system which celebrates private opulence and at the expense and creation of public squalor. And I think Los Angeles as a city is just absolutely the example of this. On Reddit recently, on the Los Angeles page, there was a question of what would you change about Los Angeles if you could change one thing? And almost every answer was get rid of the homeless. And when we walk around in Los Angeles, the streets are broken. You're riding over potholes. There's no public green space. There's very little public green space. Our schools are underfunded. Our roads are falling apart. And then we literally have built housing that is sitting empty. Like, we have a crisis in Los Angeles where we lost, was it $9 billion in homeless services funding that was just like taken up literally as a grift by people who submitted as nonprofits and then just took the money and never did the thing they said they were going to do. But in Los Angeles, even in these neighborhoods where outside you've got people sleeping on the street because they can't afford their rent, or they ended up there because they couldn't pay a medical bill or whatever, ended up with them on the street. And then like literally on the other side of the fence is a fenced property that is a $11 million home. And there is no other place I've lived where the obvious reality of this private opulence and public squalor is accepted the way that it is in Los Angeles. Because if you even just open like the Zillow app and turn off the filters of like how much it costs to rent a place, because it has to be like $11,000, $19,000, $20,000 a month. But if you turn that off, the Hollywood Hills are full of empty houses. They're just empty. They're empty all the time. We have enough housing probably in Los Angeles to actually house the 40,000 homeless individuals that we have. But we don't let them live in those empty houses in the hills, and we don't punish the people who who own those houses and keep them empty, rather than lowering the rent to a rental level that is reasonable for people who are working class in this city to actually live here. So, I mean, City of Angels, it is not.
No. I would say the last two episodes we've been on a little bit of an energy between all, because I mean, I know we're talking about something that we care a lot about that's really important. I mean, even so, as you all know, our church community was greatly impacted by the fires. And there are still people within our community who still haven't been able to get access to the benefits that they're supposed to get as a consequence of the fire, because they're renters. And because one of the things that Desmond talks about that keeps people poor is the paperwork and loopholes and all these other things you have to go through. And so this person, all their documents are burnt up. And so you have to get replacement documents to prove that you lived in the place, and then prove that you had the stuff that you can get the government money back. And they don't have time. They're also doing that in the midst of the trauma of losing all your stuff, right? It's wild, the burden we place on poor people. I think that's the first part of the book by Desmond is talking about the burden we place on poor and how much easier we make it for the wealthy people, how we make it easier for people like not only Trump, but people in that upper tier class to now I won't even say grift, just make their lives structured in such a way that things are they don't have to have the pragmatic stressors, right, of finance. And so cashing a check, going to the bank, all these things are made easier for them because we believe that to be like the lifeblood of our economy. Julia?
I was going to say, I also think that the stress of poverty is easily overlooked when you don't. It's like a thing that if you have never been poor, you cannot even conceive of. And once you get money, I think it's easy to forget because it's so traumatic. And so if you are upwardly mobile, it is very simple to forget the stress on your body and your mind of lacking resources. And so people forget. And then they're like, well, they should just work harder. And it's like, you didn't. You married well. You didn't do it.
Hey, don't hate the player, hate the game.
You married well.
No, but I also think too, like Julia, to your point, one of the things that I come up with when I have these conversations with well-intentioned people is they don't realize how selfish they are. Like, and I don't know other way to say it. Like they care more about how it's going to impact their family than they care about their neighbors, and they're okay. They have that what's the vice president's name? I keep what's it JD
JD
Vance.
Vance.
They have that JD Vance understanding of love. You know, that's totally not correct, but it's like, oh, first you love your family and then you spread love out like in these concentric circles. I'm like, that's actually not what the Bible says. Like, it doesn't talk about actually loving your family more and spreading out. It talks about loving all people, right? It talks about loving your neighbor as you love yourself. And I think people in their honest moments will say something and I'll be like, oh, this is, you actually don't care about your neighbor as much as you care about your own children. And that's the problem, because you don't understand how those things are deeply interrelated. And I don't know how to help you understand that. I don't know how to make that as obvious for you as it feels like it's obvious for me, is that, these things are deeply connected. And if you help them, ultimately you're really still helping yourself, yeah. So, Julia?
Well, I was going to say, I think one of the things is like recognizing that your neighbor is the person sleeping in a tent on the corner.
Mm.
Like, that is your neighbor. You are in community with those people. And if you don't understand that that person being rehoused in a suitable, dignified living arrangement, if you don't understand how that benefits you as well, then there's no help for you. But like, all of these people, whether you see them, whether you ignore them, whether you have no problem stepping over them sleeping on the street to get into your escalator, like whatever it is, those are still your neighbors, whether you like it or not. We get to pretend like we choose our neighbors, but we don't.
Yeah. No, we do get to live with the illusion that we get to choose our neighbors. Like, exactly right. And our
And we
neighbors.
complain about the public squalor, but we're not, when it becomes time to pass the bill or pass the resolution or whatever that is going to increase the taxes on the people who can afford it, they will fight like hell to not lose that money. But then at the same time, complain about the fact that their kids can't go to the park and there's homeless people on the street. It's like, who do you think is going to fix it? Like, you have to be willing to fix it. I also just want to name too that we're like, there's a balance here too of all of us have to exist in it. There is no ethical consumption in capitalism, right? So like, yes, I think we should all be self-reflective about how much is enough, like how much wealth is enough. And in general, I think when Jesus is talking about the wealthy and condemning them and talking about the sin of wealth, like, there is no such thing as an ethical billionaire. You do
Yeah.
not
100%.
get to billions of dollars without actively exploiting other people. I do think you can, and this is Wesley, you talk, not Wesley on the podcast, but John Wesley, you talked about John Wesley a few weeks ago about the idea of earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. And the idea is that if within a capitalist system we must exist, if you can earn as much as you can, save what you can so that you can take care of yourself and don't have to depend on the public sector, if at all possible, and then give all you can, because the point of earning that money is to make the world better, not to make yourself more comfortable. And John Wesley never never increased his salary. The salary he started earning at 19 years old, any increase he got over that for the sale of pamphlets and books and other contributions, he redistributed out into the Methodist movement. So he lived at the level of his original 19-year-old salary for the rest of his life. But it doesn't mean he made a lot of money. He gave it all away. And that's the choice, right? Is like, we should be responsible to take care of ourselves and our families and not rely on the public assets if we don't need to. But also, when it comes time to care for others, it is beneficial to have the funds to be able to do that and to say, yes, take my money and have free lunch at the schools. Yes, take my money, use my taxes, build affordable housing, do these things with my money. That's what is Christian. That's what I want you to do.
It's occurring to me as you're saying this, Blair, that the assumption that a lot of people make that people are exploiting the system is probably because those same people are exploiting the system. Like, if the ease with which people can exploit the poor, the assumption that then the poor must in turn also be doing the same to the wealthy. It's like, no, babe, that's just you.
Self-indictment.
This doesn't go back both ways. It's just you. You are the villain in the story.
And that
Sorry.
sometimes people end up stuck in poverty or lower middle class because they refuse to participate in exploiting their neighbors.
Yep.
And that's not something we talk about enough. That people who choose to be downwardly mobile often are doing so because they are aware of the exploitation and the sinfulness of a capitalist system and taking active steps to divest from it, which hurts their economic standing. But that is actually when Jesus says, give up when the rich man comes to him and says, what do I need to do to enter the kingdom of heaven? He says, you must give up all your wealth and follow me. He's literally asking that man to be downwardly mobile and to trust that God is going to take care of him and the community is going to take care of him and he doesn't need to hoard wealth. And the rich man can't do it. He walks away from Jesus because he can't do it. And that is a really hard thing to preach in Westwood, Los Angeles, California. But it's in there. It's in there. And it is us deciding we're going to behave in a different way and build a different kind of community, even if it's on the micro level. That is the only way we change this.
I mean, I think Christian ethics and economics are microeconomics. I mean, they're all about what you can do in your own local community, in your own life, in the way in which you engage each other. And you influence the system by who you vote for and how you participate, the larger macro systems, but it is a micro kind of economics. And I think thinking about like what we might do, like what is you might say, what is a progressive Christian view of economics or, economic justice or whatever? What does that look like? I mean, I think first of all, it looks like taking the Bible seriously and what it says, as you just said, Blair, like actually looking and deeply engaging the text for the ways in which it critiques the hoarding of wealth, how it talks about how wealth corrupts, like as you said, unable to give away riches, talks about the love of money is the root of all evils, how you can't serve God and mammon, and talking about greed as a vice, as selfishness as a vice. Ultimately, and this is where I think, how I think, as we will say, there is no ethical way to make money in capital, or there's no non-exploitative way to make money in capitalism the way we have it constructed. Adam Smith capitalism actually is very different than what we do, to be fair to Adam Smith and people who actually thought of capitalism. At the same time, I think that our disposition towards wealth is at the root of the problem. You can have a socialist system, but if you love money within a socialist system, you're going to make it corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
You can have a communist system, as we saw, and if you love money, you're going to make that corrupt. And so again, this is why I go back to the very beginning of the podcast, is like, what's your goal? If your goal is the beloved community, you need to be asking yourself, does this actually uphold and support and uplift the beloved community? Can't everybody agree on that facet, that principle, if that's the goal? And I just realized that's not most people's goals.
Right.
Like that's just literally not their goal, and that should be your goal. If you are a person of faith and you actually want to live economically, like in terms of how you think about money in alignment with God, it needs to be that end. You need to be thinking about the ends rather than just the process by which you accumulate or spend money. And I think a couple of things I want to say before we wrap up in terms of what Desmond says in terms of suggestions, and then I'll turn it over to y'all, see if y'all got anything else you want to say in terms of for Desmond's suggestions. But he talks about investing in ending poverty, and he has this really good quote. There's two things I want to say, but one, he talks about how people might say we can't afford to do this work because it's going to cost too much. On page 121 in the book, he says, people might ask, how can we afford it? What a sinful question. What a selfish, dishonest question. One asked as if the answer wasn't staring us in the face. We could afford it if we allowed the IRS to do its job. We could afford it if the well-off among us took less from the government. We could afford it if we designed our welfare state to expand opportunity and not guard fortunes. I was like, I preach. He's like, what a selfish, dishonest, sinful question.
That's a preacher's kid for sure.
Man, I hope if Isaiah writes something like that when he's older, made me so proud. I'm like, oh my gosh. But what he talks about is just the allowing the IRS to do its job. So on page 125, he writes, The best place to start, in my view, is with the cheaters. The IRS now estimates that the United States loses more than $1 trillion a year in unpaid taxes, most of it owing to tax avoidance by multinational corporations and wealthy families. Congress hasn't given the agency the resources it needs to hunt down tax criminals, leaving the IRS outgunned and outmatched. And this is essentially what Doge, like the IRS got doged. Like, it was already underfunded, and they just literally cut the funding of the IRS. Like, with the idea by billionaires talking to regular middle and poor people, like on the MAGA side, saying, oh, you don't want the IRS to be fully funded because they're going to come and take your money. Rather than saying, actually, no, they're coming to get your money. Like, they're coming to get, like, it doesn't. All right. I know you're going to say something, Wesley, but I'm just so frustrated.
Oh, no. I mean, what I was going to add is that this whole Doge thing, as it furthers the idea that the federal government is somehow full of a lot of like inefficiencies, when the reality is they are so scrutinized that they don't have room to like have waste left and right. Who does have waste left and right? Big corporations. When you think about tech and the money that flows into them, and the I don't know, there was maybe a couple years ago, maybe during the pandemic, there was this whole sort of like series on TikTok where people were like, my day in the office as a tech worker. And it's just like one meeting here, a lunch here, a snack here, a play here, one meeting over here. There's just like capitalism, corporations is where the waste is. The federal government in their bureaucracies are doing very important specific work that is because everyone is scrutinizing them. There's a Democratic representative on this side and a Republican Senate representative on that side who are looking for ways to boost their own sort of like stance, and they will try to find these areas, and so they aren't creating all this waste and fraud and abuse. They are heavily scrutinized. So it's this whole Doge thing has been so frustrating because it just continues to sort of underscore like a false reality.
No, I mean, the degree to which the government could be more efficient is minimal compared to the way other corporations could be. And I think the fact of the matter is we've allowed a president to put people in positions of power by the fact that these people are white, and the assumption is that they are qualified just because by their very whiteness. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Like, yeah, but I also think that we as American citizens have allowed ourselves to like fall prey to these ideas, because whenever anyone talks about the United States Postal Service as if it's this inefficient, unproductive thing that isn't making any money, like ignores the fact that this is a social service that does things for rural America that private companies will never do because there is not profit in that.
Yeah. Or the only way that could happen is through like Amazon exploiting workers, like literally exploiting workers. And this gets to Desmond's second point, which was empower the poor, like literally give the poor the tools to fight back against this kind of techno-feudalist state, which is what it actually is.
Thank you, Giannis.
Unions.
And it is unions. I mean, unions are a huge part. But so what he means by empower the poor, he writes on page 149, the goal is singular: to end the exploitation of the poor by any means necessary. We should empower the American workers and expand housing access. We should also ensure fair access to capital. Banks should stop robbing the poor and near poor of billions of dollars each year, immediately ending exorbitant overdraft fees. Like, he has all this stuff about banking and just like basic stuff. And even the fact that this man is quoting Malcolm X, like, I mean, he is, I don't know what radicalized him. Like, I don't know. I mean, y'all know more about my idea, but somewhere along the way, I was like, something got into this dude. This dude is talking some real talk. He ain't got a lot of friends. I think he ain't got a lot of wealthy friends. I can see that because he don't be pulling no punches.
We talked about in the book, he actually gets in like almost gets in a physical fight with an economist who's like challenging him on these things. He says, I listened to it just yesterday. It was like fingers were pressed into chests. Like they're like, he's like fiery about this.
But this is how he does his work and his research, right? Like, he moved into the hood in Milwaukee. He was living on some streets that I wouldn't prance around on when I was back there. You know what I mean? And like, he's in it with these people and he's seeing it. And that's his work. And that's why I know many people in the Black community love and appreciate him. That's why he's always welcome, right? That's why he's allowed into these spaces. And he's this is a perfect example of a white man using his whiteness for good.
Yeah, 100%. And go ahead, Wesley.
I was gonna say, you said he writes by any means necessary. Storm the Capitol necessary? Just
I
asking
mean,
questions.
I don't know. I mean, I do think if you think about this in light of, like, I think people forget the actual experience of what it means to be poor and have the boot on your neck. And we forget the fact that the reason people came to Washington with Martin Luther King is it was for like it was about jobs.
The
It's
Poor
economic
People's
justice.
Campaign.
And like, I mean, that's why they were there. And that's why I think it was partly the reason why it was multiracial is King and other people like that have been able to speak a language that galvanized these multiracial coalitions to understand how this system exploits us all, and that we have to perhaps not storm to break in the Capitol, but we need to make our presence known. We need to make our presence known. And that requires a kind of organizing and a kind of work that our generation, I shouldn't say our generation, like there have been different, obviously, movements with our generation that have been attuned to this, but sometimes it gets wrapped up in academic language, or it gets co-opted. The words get co-opted by conservatives, and movements die out, in part because I think we're all exhausted from working so much, and I joke about how, I did marry well and I am doing well financially, but like, y'all know how, like, I work too much. I don't even say all the time. I work way too much.
Like a
there's
dog.
Yeah, like like
You need to sit down. You need to relax.
Where is Sabbath?
Yeah, and as someone, that is actually what's convicted me the most, is actually thinking about Sabbath, because I don't take the time off that I need to. And I think if you give people so much to do that they're exhausted, then you don't feel like you have the energy to fight in the way that you otherwise would.
It's one of the reasons that 2020 was people were at home and people were able to sit and they had the space to think. And it's one of the reasons that people were taking to the streets. It's also one of the reasons they said, open it up.
Yeah.
Send everyone back to work.
Take that $300 a week away.
It's one of the reasons why the UC system, for the most part, moved to a quarter system and away from the semester. UC Berkeley is one of the only ones that remains a semester because students have more time to protest when you have longer semesters than when you have quarters.
Yeah, wow, I didn't know that. That not surprising. Not surprising. The last part that Desmond suggests, again, I think these are in alignment with the beloved community, what it looks like to have your goal be the kingdom of God, is tear down the walls. And he's talking about integration, talking about get rid of segregated spaces. And that's across the board, whether you're talking about like housing segregation, banking segregation, academic segregation, like all these services and benefits that I didn't even realize were segregated, right? Until I actually got into some money. And you're like, oh, wow, I didn't even know this thing existed. And opening up so poor people have access to actual upward mobility would make a huge difference. And these things are like, I think the thing that I'll just say in closing is these suggestions, while seeming radical on the surface, are really basic. Like, this isn't like, he's not saying anything that's like, that is outlandish. It's just like, it's radical in the sense that it makes us confront the fact that, as Julia said, this is a system we have opted into. We have chosen it. We're like, this is what we want, apparently. And it makes us own it. He just makes us actually own it. And as someone who has written about accountability, that for me was so persuasive. I was like, oh, wow. He's saying we have to be accountable for the system we've created and not continue to tell ourselves the lies that these people deserve what they got, because that's not true.
The founding documents, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like, that is what we're supposed to be here to do. And that's not, it shouldn't be for the people who already have them. It should be for everyone. It shouldn't be like, if you already have it, you get to keep it. If you don't, too bad, so sad. Like, and I know that that's kind of what it's turned into. I don't know. Everyone should read the book and then be sad. Be ready to be sad.
And then protest. Hit the streets. Be ready to be sad, then protest. Blair, is there anything you want to say before we close?
But just also be inspired that like small changes can make a big difference in this. Small changes can, especially in the idea of mutual aid. of being willing to give of yourself so that others in your direct community, like it's not just about giving to charities or overhauling laws, like do that too. But sometimes if you are in relationship that is actually socioeconomically diverse, which I hope our churches are, then they rarely are, but in places where they are, finding a way to give those little micro amounts of money, like $200, $100, $50 can change somebody's life who's in poverty, and get into a system, into a community where you can form those relationships and where you can do mutual aid in ways that are accountable and healthy and not exploitative, but you can do it. And I encourage everybody to learn more about that and to find the ways that you can right now, today, make a choice to decrease poverty and participate in the public celebration of the great abundance that is in this country.
Yeah. I mean, in a few weeks, we'll be talking about scarcity and abundance. That's going to be in the politics. What do we call it, Wesley? The political trinity, I think is what we say.
Something like that.
I can't remember. But really, I mean, I think so much of the abundance thinking is kingdom of God thinking, I think it's kingdom of God thinking. But well, for those of you who are able to, I don't know how long this episode is going to be, but it's not short. So thank you for listening. This was a heavy episode. We had a lot to talk about, and I was like, you know what, we're just going to talk about it. It needs to be talked about, and it's fine. So thank you for joining us for the Progressive Christian Podcast. The Progressive Christian Podcast is the ministry of the Loft worship community of Westway United Methodist Church. If you'd like to connect with us and be a part of the conversation, you can find us on all social media platforms at The Progressive Christians. Our show is mixed and edited by our wonderful audio engineer, AJ. He and his partner basically are our producers as well, so shout outs to them. Please subscribe to this show, especially our YouTube. Subscribe and click the like on the YouTube button. Just keep hitting the likes. And even if you don't like, even if you're kind of like, I don't know if I like it anyway. If you listen to this much, you probably kind of like it. And thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.